Welcome back to Cheche. We're looking ahead to the presentation of the budget later today, demystifying the process, what's taking place. We'd like to know your expectations. Here in the studio, our guests are giving us their expectations and their concerns. From the Budget Committee in the National Assembly, we have the Vice Chair, Mary Emase Otucho. From the Finance Committee, we have John Badi. And from the Institute of Economic Affairs, we have the Executive Director, Kwame Owino. So we've already talked about the fact that this appears to be a budget that linked very closely with the elections next year. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That came from you, Mr. Mbadi. But we have accepted, and you're both concerned about the shortfall in revenue collection. What are the implications of that? I'll start with you, Kwame, for every Kenyan,
okay, let's start with the fact that even if you accept the numbers as 2.27 trillion, we think it's 2.4 based on the additions. Revenue collection, total revenue collection is 1.5 trillion. Okay, so it means our gap is almost 700 billion shillings. Now, some of that is going to be filled with domestic debt, which is basically the way we do it, and the others will be some grants, which is small, I think 72 billion. So just 10% of the gap is filled by grants. So the rest will have to be raised through debt, and obviously that's it. So the first thing is we are actually spending more than we are able to raise, notwithstanding the fact that we've also assumed we'll be able to collect much more. So we have a big deficit.
Which I believe you had a problem with.
Yes. So we had a big deficit to begin with. Then obviously we're going to be stressed. So I think together with the policy, the policy highlights that the Cabinet Secretary gives today, I think members of Parliament need to ask him, how are we funding this budget? And Parliament always is concerned, rightly. I mean, the word they give out there is that we are concerned about debt, but they still approve a budget which has a 800 billion gap, which means you're saying, fine, this is just a wrap on the feast, but nevertheless, go ahead and borrow, and go ahead and commit Kenyans and future generations to paying this money. So we have no choice. If we want to control deficits, and we want to control deficits, Parliament has to stand back and say, look, we are not allowing you to spend more than what you can raise. But that's so the first implication is higher taxes.
What impact will that have on the whole economic forecast and development? If we cut down on the borrowing,
yes,
deficit you're talking about.
Yes. What effect would it have?
Yes, on the economic.
I think the first thing is waste. One of the things that Parliament has never done is tell the Cabinet Secretary, look, last year we had these big projects under the name of NYS. We now have projects, the auditor's report from last year, telling us that a lot of that NYS money, much more than what we claimed was the 170, was actually going to people's pockets. So instead of asking us to go back to raise taxes and raise debt, the Cabinet Secretary should be asked, look, control spending. That's it. Okay. If we can raise 1.5 trillion, spend within that limit. Stop giving money to false consultants and all these other people who present PowerPoint presentations and get 17 million per PowerPoint presentation. It has to be that.
That talks about what the Cabinet Secretary should do, but what are the implications for the ordinary Kenyan?
The implications for the ordinary Kenyan, to be honest, if we cut down our budget and stop spending, the ordinary Kenyan doesn't suffer. Because one of the things that we have to stop, advise Kenyans to understand is a big budget does not necessarily mean we have more services. It doesn't. It just means, yes, those consultants get in.
But does it mean that you broaden the tax base, or does it mean that you come up with creative taxes for us to pay?
We can come with creative taxes, but my view is, given our level of income, we are almost at the limit, and the KRA is telling us that, of how much taxes you can take from people. Because when you take away, for instance, right now, for every 100 shillings worth of production in Kenya, the government spends 31.
The argument proffered is that we must borrow to grow.
Before we get into that, yes,
thank you. I think what I want to say is that when you look at our collections, what we collect basically is sufficient to cater for recurrent expenditure. So we borrow for development.
Yes.
And we must borrow to develop if we have to grow as a nation. So I think what we should be asking ourselves, and that is what we are addressing, even when we're looking at the budget, we're focusing on the outputs. Are we seeing the output
from the borrowing,
in terms of tangible from the borrowing, where the money is going to? And looking at the budget and the strategies that the government wants to put in place, they're talking of broadening the tax base, bringing more people in the tax bracket, and two, to strengthen the revenue administration by introducing, reforms, tax collection the system, improving systems, that is what has been mentioned, and also besides that, also with the acts that were approved, the excise duty and the VAT, which of course is restricting the giving of tax liability and things like that. So that is what they are saying. Those are the strategies that will be used to enhance revenue collection. But what I would want to say is that we really need to be cautious. And I'm happy that National Treasury they did agree on austerity measures, and most of those budgets were cut. They cut down by 30% across the board, except Parliament, of course. And I think that is a good thing going forward. It will help us cut on expenditure, but we need to do more. Otherwise, if we don't, it would mean more borrowing. And if there is more borrowing, of course, we know the consequences.
Yes. I think you asked this question of what do we expect on the ordinary mwananchi.
Yes.
One, I don't expect this government to increase taxes. It's not an option in my view. So what therefore it means is that, because you see, actually, something that has not been mentioned is that this government, this is the regime that has introduced so many
government, not a regime,
unprecedented, unprecedented number of new taxes has been introduced during these 3 years that we've had the Jubilee administration. But that's not the point I want to put across. If increasing taxes is not an option, broadening the tax base, I think, has been overemphasized. It is exaggerated. That is one of the reasons why we are overestimating our revenue. And you will not get more in terms of broadening the tax base. So for me, I think the option we have is that we are going to borrow more. If we have to finance this budget, we'll borrow more than even what we anticipate to borrow.
But isn't that the problem with that?
The effect on the economy is that we are going to crowd out the private sector. There will be no more, there will be reduced investments, there will be increased unemployment, the cost of living will be high, obviously. So the effect is bad. It's not good for the economy, so to speak, in a summary. So my view is that if the government, many of us have spoken about austerity measures. I think that was a very good idea, but it has been abandoned along the way. Because if you look at what was brought in the BPS, which actually implemented some austerity measures, and compare it to the budget estimates that we have today, there's a complete shift. So this, the government needs a treasury, and I take it back to the treasury. The treasury needs to cushion Kenyans by insisting on their policy pronouncements. But finally, there's something that I wanted to speak to on the issue of ambitious investment in terms of spending, even on the capital expenditure. We need to ask ourselves, when we borrow money, where do we apply it? A country like Zambia, country like Zambia, for example, when they went out to borrow Eurobond, they were very clear. They first of all came up with a project, specific projects that were supposed to be funded through Eurobond proceeds. In Kenya, we borrowed it for general budgetary support. That is careless as a country, because you see, you cannot tell us that you gave out money to NYS to clean, to sweep streets of Kisumu. You cannot go out there to borrow money. I know sweeping Kisumu, making it clean is very good, and that's why we have county governments. I expected them to make our towns clean, including Kibera. But borrowing money to come and clean the streets, to open drainages, is not value for that loan, because we are not creating assets. We need to borrow to create assets. And I want to conclude by saying, last financial year, by end of the year, June, we had over 100 billion in terms of pending bills to pay. And that is what distorted the beginning of this year. That is when we had the cash crunch almost, because we were paying money that because of the supplementary budget too. We ended up in procuring at the end of the year, piled a lot of pending bills, and that is this. And very finally, Udwas, I wanted to mention that we have over 1,000, that is at the end of June last year, over 1,000 ongoing projects which were valued at 3 trillion shillings. And you know the Kenyan style, that 3 trillion will move to not less than 4.5 trillion. I think we need to be careful, even as we want to please everyone, that we are doing development. We need to be cautious and bite what we can chew.
Develop within our means.
Pardon?
Are you saying develop within our means?
We develop within our means. Because
let me come on buddy, sorry for this. But you're parliamentarians. Your work is to have oversight over the executive. Your work is not to lament to Kenyans. Your work is to say, look, we will not accept a supplementary budget this year. Period. Because what happens is, even as you talk about debt, every time the cabinet secretary, and he's come twice, every time the cabinet secretary has come to parliament to raise the debt limit, he's got it. So you don't tell us here as Kenyans that we are concerned about the debt, and he tells you we're expanding the debt range by 500 billion, and you give him the authorization. Because the Constitution gave you powers to have oversight. And oversight is real oversight. Oversight is not about telling us in media studios how you are concerned. Oversight is going before Parliament and going in the record and saying this debt extension should not be given. That's it.
And we have not seen such protestations on the floor of the House.
I don't know. I think
that's what he said.
You say, I think what Kwame is saying is right.
Yeah.
But I think, Kwame, if you listened to some of our contribution in Parliament, and I've been very, very candid on what I believe is right for this country. I may be a lone voice, but I say it. And I say it as it is. And you will still hear it this time. I was telling some of my colleagues where we met about the debt levels that we have in this country. Imagine from 2013 June to date, what has been the change in the debt level of this country? We moved from 1.8 trillion that the Jubilee government found as the total debt to now 3.3 trillion. That's an increase of 1.5 trillion in 3 years. I want to give you another very last example. This debt, the borrowing from China, I think is something that we need to look into. Look, last year, in terms of interest repayments, we paid 4.3 billion to China. This year, we plan to spend 16.2 billion on interest payment alone. Now, it has moved from 4 to 16 in 1 year. It is going to 19 next year. That is according to the projection. It can even be more. And then going in the next 5 or so years, in fact, I was telling my party leader that I am scared that if we take over this government, we may not have money to run this country.
You probably will not.
And so I think it's something to be cautious about. But it's worrying us in the opposition.
Let me add one thing, if you allow me. One other thing that's peculiar about this year's budget, and again, I haven't had many people mention it. It may escape. For the first time in several years, this never happened under President Kibaki. For the first time in several years, the debt payments this year, we are paying more in interest than we are paying in redemption. That alone should give you a red sign. That's a red signal. It's as if I borrowed money from a bank, and this year the amount I'm paying them in interest is higher than what I'm paying them to redeem them.
Let me ask you, Kwame. When you say that, how come that I'm reading in the press that IMF and World Bank are saying we're okay with those debts?
No, actually, they say that last year. Right now, they've changed it. Last year they did change. They've looked at it right now, and especially when the disclosures about our commitments with China and the standard gauge railway and a few of these other things came up, they're now a bit concerned. Honorable Imasi tells us that the Cabinet Secretary has given the assurance that they shouldn't be concerned. I would be deeply concerned. Let me give you an example. For instance, we are raising 1.5 trillion from local domestic resources. Of that 1.5 trillion, the Constitution through something that's called the Consolidated Fund Services. Those are the things that have to be paid for. One, the salaries of constitutional office holders. We have to pay judges, we have to pay the president, irrespective of how much money we have, together with pensions of retired public servants and public debt. And the public debt is 90% of what is called the consolidated. That amount, which comes down to about 465 billion, is spoken for. It's not money that we can negotiate. So if we raise 466 billion, 465 has to be paid, and we survive with the others. Now that is what is called non-discretionary spending. You don't have flexibility about it, you have to pay. Of that amount, 90% is debt, and then pensions is the other 5-6%. All those figures are going up. So it tells you that if we raise 1.5 trillion, even being optimistic, 30% of all public finances are just to pay for this non-discretionary.
Let me ask you, Kwame, all this information you have at the Institute of Economic Affairs,
yes.
What is the level of interaction between civil society and the budget-making process and Treasury? And because these are colleagues you're engaging with,
yes.
and they're familiar with these facts and figures.
They are.
And what is the
Treasury is very aware of these things. The only people who are not putting, the only way this gets corrected is if parliamentarians got up.
Because no one else will be heard. There has to be a hammer.
Treasury knows and they hear us. But the only people who can stop them from this reckless spending is parliamentarians.
Yes.
And I think that is why when I started, I said we have raised those concerns on national debt. We are saying that we are concerned. We need to control our spending. We do not need to. We need to be realistic. You know, if we are realistic in our revenue estimates, then we will limit our expenditures to what we have and to the limit which we feel is good.
No, sorry, let me just intervene. You know, raising concerns is not your mandate.
Yeah.
It is stopping.
Yeah.
Why are you stopping? Because you can alter those figures. You can say this 4 billion can't go there. This has to be cut off. Why aren't you doing the cutting and
we have advised National Treasury as the budget.
I thought you can veto.
And like I said earlier, that is our responsibility, and that is why we are raising this concern, so that we still have an option as we debate now the estimates presented before the House of the Parliament, full House.
Can do that.
Maybe it's a question
we can make those recommendations. We can make amendments. We still have that
of numbers. I think
actually the truth is that we can only make those amendments in the budget committee.
Yes.
We have tried in the past, and I think the Speaker also did us disservice to this country, because we have tried to amend some of these things on the floor of the House. The Speaker has made a ruling which stands to date that you cannot make an amendment on budget estimates, the money bills is clear, but on budget estimates, which is not even a money bill, the Speaker made a very funny, very interesting ruling that you cannot bring an amendment on the floor of the House. And therefore, the only possibility is if I have an amendment, I have to send it to the budget committee, which budget committee would decide whether to accept it or not. And if they don't accept it, it dies. So I think now, and I have the benefit of not sitting in the budget committee, I would advise and urge my colleague that some of these things you would have done, but I know they will not do it.
How come the budget committee is chaired and vice chaired by Jubilee? How did that
because
happen?
They need budget.
The chair is Jubilee, the vice chair is Jubilee. How is that? So where is the opposition's contribution or ability to actually effect or implement anything?
They participate, they are members of the committee, and they were involved in the selection of the chair and the vice chair. So I think that is...
But how did that happen? Let me tell you what happened. You remember,
you walked out.
Remember we held this country at ransom for almost 2 months without committees because of 2 committees, Park and Budget. We insisted that Budget Committee should be chaired by a member of the opposition, but the executive didn't want to hear anything of that. And unfortunately for us, the standing orders of Parliament did not provide expressly for the opposition to chair. It actually, the standing orders allows for election. And when it came to election, it was obvious that Jubilee had already arranged. Actually, the chair and the vice chair were not even elected in the committee. It had already been elected. The committee just endorsed. Actually, that has been communicated. The committee, and that is why even recently, when
we did vote at the committee. We voted.
No, we voted, but that was just actually, let me call it a waste of time. Because you see, it had been communicated the chair has to be so and so and must be TNA, and then the vice chair was URP. Those agreements had been made, and well, you understand, if the standing orders did not cure this, you would understand if any government in power to play.
But even if they are Jubilee themselves, don't they see the problem they are bringing to this country? Even if they are that nonsense of the number.
I think your question is misdirected. It should be directed to me.
That's what I'm asking. You're asking her. Don't they see the problem?
Now, perhaps that is the political direction now that Mbadi was talking about, that we must get these things done as government, as Jubilee, as part of our agenda. So you have to make it happen.
Nothing to do with the party.
I think when we are dealing with issues budget, it's not about Jubilee or CORD. It's about this country. We look at what projects we want to finance. Is it good for the country? So it's not really about Jubilee or about CORD. And we have, across the political divide as members of the committee, we have questioned most of these expenditures, proposals. We have invited the departments before our committees, the departmental committees, to question. We have actually cancelled or refused to take on board some of the proposals, like in the finance committee. We cut down most of the budgets by 1.6B, and we reallocated to other more needy projects that we felt were more important and a priority for the nation. That's why I was telling you when I started, most of the deductions, rearrangements of the budget, rejecting this project or the other, it is handled by the departmental committee. If it is the departmental committee on health, when the budget is submitted before that committee, they are the ones who do most of that bit before forwarding it to the budget and appropriation. When it comes to us, we look at the overall policy issues. We look at issues of how the budget has adhered to the BPS, the legal issues. We look at the policy concerns, among others. But basically, the responsibility to question, interrogate, visit, reject, remove, lies with the departmental committee. And we have done that. I am also a member of the finance committee. We are always, I think we are the best in doing that. We rearrange, we reject, we've done that, and we have, like this particular budget in the finance committee, we have reallocated monies to projects which are almost complete, and the contractor has never been paid a shilling. Like the Lake Basin project in Kisumu, like the Ronald Ngala University College in Cliffy, and a few other projects that we felt were critical to Ministry of Tourism and other areas that, and industrialization, where we felt that these are sectors which are meant to drive the economy. They need to implement development projects that are supposed to create employment, and you know, we do that. So I think that is where we have probably a problem. So if the Mira issue goes before the departmental committee on agriculture, and they discuss it, and they decide to approve, actually one of the reasons why budget committee was dissolved is because in the last financial year, we did rearrange the budget. We felt this was not right. We cut down on most of the budgets. We reallocated the money. And that was a big mistake. That is why the budget committee, that's one of the reasons why we dissolved.
Okay. So we'll take a break now. And come back to the issue of the budget. Do keep letting us know what your expectations of the budget are. Our SMS number is 22422, and you can tweet us using the hashtag Cheche.